All right, Brian. So let me ask you a question about how we can invest in RV parks. So people can usually invest, they can go to a traditional bank, Chase, West Fargo. They can ask for, other people's money, OPM, or they can, make their own kind of funds. So can you go in and out can you go and talk about more about the difference about those and how we can acquire RV parks?
So we acquire RV parks by getting investors to invest in our fund, and then we take those investors' funds and we buy RV parks that we like that fit our criteria, and we usually use their investor funds for down payment money and that money to also improve the parks, make capital improvements, phase one, phase two improvements. But usually it's to acquire the park and then make improvements. And then we get solid financing in terms usually. That's how we fund the parks.
And then what's the difference? Like if I want to go to the bank, and what's the difference if, if fund the funds, the funds that you get?
So versus going to a bank versus the fund of funds. Well, in the fund of funds, we get money from investors, and then we pull that money together to buy parks. If we had to go to the bank, we'd have to apply for a loan to go buy a park. It takes time, and we have to qualify, and they have to do their own underwriting and all that stuff. In the fund, we just gather people's money, and then we go invest it for them, and then we give them returns on their money and give them dividends and equity at the end. So they benefit three and four different ways. Usually we pay them dividends, we give them some cash flow, they get some equity splits as well as the water flow.
And then I know there's different kind of funds out there. I know there's syndication and then fund of funds. Can you explain the difference when it comes to those?
Yeah. So a syndication is designed for funding one property, usually like a multifamily, or you could fund like one RV park out of a syndication. With the fund of funds, you would fund multiple parks or multiple properties in a fund, and that's how you do it. It's probably basically multiple properties versus one property.
Which ones do you think is better for me? Let's say I'm a brand new person. Do you think
So
it'll be easier?
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're a
Do you think it'll be
brand new
easier to go to
investor,
residential, or do you think just go right ahead and go to the commercial side, the RV side?
commercial takes way too long. It's way too hard for a beginner investor. So the beginner investor, I would recommend doing single family first. Get your first four properties. Then if you've gotten your first four properties, then you can look at other things, other asset classes like either multifamily or RV parks or maybe mobile home parks. But yeah, you want to nail down your first four properties first, your first single family properties, and then branch out from there if you feel like it.
And let's say I have no experience when it comes to real estate, but I have the money to invest. Should I do a residential, or should I go to somebody that has, like yourself, funds of funds to actually invest in RVs?
Well, if you had the funds and you were accredited, I would say jump into a fund of funds where you can make better returns, better cash flow, and you can definitely make more in the back end on the equity.
And then you said the returns are a lot higher when it comes to RV parks, right? Can you
Yeah.
go a little into more details on why it's a little bit more?
So the returns on RV parks are better because there's less maintenance to be done. Like on like an apartment building, you have people moving in and moving out all the time. You have ongoing maintenance almost every month. So in an RV park, there's quite a bit less maintenance. So that means we have better returns on the cash flow.
And when it comes to an income, or I guess the revenue of an RV park, is it just the rent, or is there more when it comes to some kind of cash flow?
So in RV parks, you can have up to, let's say, multiple streams of income. You got the park, the space rents. You got firewood. You can do propane, ice. You can rent golf carts. You can rent kayaks. You can even rent. There's all kinds of things you can rent or sell. So there's multiple streams of income in RV parks.
So you're saying the risk is a lot less because there are more income.
Yeah, well,
I
yeah,
guess you
there's
can say
more
when it comes to
streams. Oh yeah, so you got the laundry room as well. You got the laundry room, and you could maybe even charge for Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi, the laundry room, you can firewood, you got ice, propane, golf carts, maybe a kayak rentals.
I guess you can say it's more appetizing to invest in RV parks because there is more revenue, right?
Well, yeah, there's
So
more streams of revenue than, let's say, mobile home park or an apartment building.
what are the current market trends for RV parks and how are they expected to change in the future?
Yeah. So that being said, I know during COVID, I think we saw was it upwards of 15% increase in their occupancies. I think it's averaged out about 2-3% year over year, though, the last 21, 22 years. We are seeing a slight decrease since the end of COVID, but we are still seeing an overall growth. I think since like 2000, it's roughly, I think, an almost like 18-19% net increase. I think looking forward to between now and 2027, I think I've seen a 1 or 2% annual growth expected on top of the current 15,000 parks that exist in North America.
Got it. And then when it comes to demand, when it comes to RV parks, I know that it is a higher cost of living, also with inflation. So when it comes to the demand of housing, is RV parks like a good candidate for that, or is it maybe something else like apartments?
Well, evaluating the demand for a park kind of falls into a couple aspects, right? So we look at seasonality, we look at income for the area, and we also highly focus on drive to the area, right? So seasonality is our first aspect, right? Typically, RV parks make more sense if it's like usually a warmer year-round climate, right? Where RV parks in the northern states, they still work, right? So don't get me wrong, but they can be trickier to underwrite because they experience seasonality. So you have to make a bunch of money for a short amount of time and then use that money and ride out like the winter months. Unless you're maybe next to a ski lodge, but typically in colder climates, you're really busy and then you're really quiet. So we look to underwrite parks that have like, at minimum 6 months, ideally 9+ months of like seasonality where people are staying. And then it comes into like income area, right? Typically RVs for us, we treat them as affordable housing solutions. So they usually make sense in two different avenues. One, in areas where the cost of living has grown rapidly, especially during COVID. And this serves as a means to reset that balance for people. Or secondly, in places where income is typically already on the lower end, typically that falls usually in the Midwest or maybe some of the southern states. So those are the kind of areas to focus would be any spot that accommodates an affordable housing solution with an income adjusted community or a spot where that income does not match the rate of growth or appreciation that's occurred. Like in the West Coast, you've seen homes double, triple during COVID, but people's incomes don't double, triple in that same time frame. So there's a demand for it here, right? But then it goes back to point one, which is depending where you're on the West Coast, right? Some of the northern parts, like up in Washington, you experience seasonality. So it has its pros and cons, but for us in our fund, we would say not interested because it doesn't fit our criteria, right? And then thirdly would be a demand for that area, right? So parks need to have affordable solution. They need to have seasonality component, but also have a drive, whether it's like amusement parks, whether it's just next to like a local town, whether it's next to some other common area of work, maybe, or sometimes it just may be that it falls adjacent to a suburb that's still adjacent to another large city, which makes sense for future investing, right? I think a few of our most recent parks were in like Missouri and like the burbs of like Texas, especially in the Houston area, where they were still in a suburban area, but they were still in proximity to a high demand area that had a large workforce. And it made sense for us to have affordable housing. It fit within that seasonality aspect. And they also were useful to a spot where people can live and commute to work and still make sense of it. So yeah, as a recap, those are our three really predominant factors we use when determining demand for the park in the area.
I mean, when it comes to affordability, I know rents right now are a little bit costly depending on which state you are. Some states are up to like $2,000. When it comes to like rent wise, what's the average you're looking at when it comes to RV parks, or does it depend on states as well?
Yeah, it does vary quite a bit by state, right? So some states in like the Midwest or even like the Southeast, you might see $350, $550 a month as an average. You might find stuff in the middle belt of the country in this $500 to $800 range. And in the West Coast, I've even seen, RV pads going for $2,000, $3,000 a month. So it does dictate a lot on the location, but I would say in general, you do see that like an RV spot is typically like 50 to 60% cheaper than traditional rent, that of an apartment or a single family residence. So that's probably a better way to put it, is that it's a fractional in terms of percentage of the the fair market rent in the area of a traditional single family.
And then when it comes to, I guess you can say, I'm running out of questions on my head. Sorry about that. Let's see.
Well, read this chat.
What the questions? Let's see. What question was that? That was a
number 12 is a good
demand.
one.
Not another question regarding that, but I
11 and 12. Those are
the demand of the
risk management. So yeah,
number 12. You said.
That's the way.
Let's see. All right. So when it comes to buying an RV park, there are some, I guess, pitfalls that people fall into sometimes. When it comes to underwriting an RV park, like what are the, I guess, red flags that you look for that it's a no-no when it comes to buying an RV park, or maybe not a no-no, or maybe something you have to look at before you buy something?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are definitely a few ways to look at that. I think for us on the fund, the big factors are, is there room to expand, right? It's one of our biggest things, which is a way for us to mitigate risk because we're buying a park based upon its current value, but we have a known plan that we can probably 2 to 5x its value with expansion. So if a park doesn't have much room to much room to expand, that's usually our first red flag because it won't make sense for our fund because we have this 5-year life cycle on average, right? If we can't develop the park, increase its value, and either have a buyout or refinance at 5 years or so, it's probably going to be a no, right? Another thing may be if the park is already fully stabilized currently, it may be another challenge for us. And that's also so there's a caveat to that, but like if the park is fully stabilized, it means we're probably purchasing it at a premium rate, usually at probably like a 6 or 7 cap, which is not ideal because we may get a good cash flowing asset, but we're probably not going to be able to pull investors' initial capital back quick enough to make sense of it, right? So when it comes to the fund, the two priorities are, first priority is, right, get an investor's initial capital back. Priority 2 is get the investor's preferred return back on top of that, right? So if the fund is buying a deal and it's already stabilized, it's at a high cap rate, you can't get their priority 1 back, which get their initial capital back that quick. So we would typically pass on it unless we had some discussion or find a way to exit. But typically with our 5-year cycle, it's hard to do unless we can somehow extend it. It's like 7 or 10-year hold. But that would be a very unique special circumstance, which is not likely something we're ready to do, at least in our current fund structure. Otherwise, it would just be scenarios where we're seeing super low occupancy. We're seeing where there's like really no demand for the area sometimes. And we've seen parks really well priced, really good discount, have good amenities, but they're in the middle of nowhere. Like the next nearest amenity is 3, 4, 5 hours away, or the nearest town is like 500 people. And there just isn't enough demand, no matter how sweet we make it, other than putting, like $100 million, making an amusement park out of it. There's just no way to get demand there. So if there isn't a need for people to be in the area, even though the price is right, the cap rate's good, they have great amenities, the park may be pretty and clean, it'll just be like a red flag for us still. And then just lastly, I think another big one we see is the quality of people in the area, because sometimes parks, unfortunately, are known to and sometimes have associations with like drug trafficking or just people who are just less than ideal with probably multiple criminal records or are doing a lot of crime in the park. So if we go to a park that's already a high rate of that, we typically will shy away from it just to avoid having our money associated with any sort of legal or potential legal concern in the future. But yeah, I think those would probably be our biggest, 4 or 5 red flags that I think of offhand.
And then when it comes to, let's say, for example, I guess people's biggest fear, it's the economy or a recession. So when it comes to, I guess, in this particular kind of asset, is there downfall when it comes to maybe a recession, or is this maybe a recession proof, or how will you go about moving if there's some kind of downturn?
Yeah, that's a good question. And funny enough, we like to think of RV parks as recession proof. And obviously, nothing is guaranteed when it comes to investing, but we did see that during COVID, right? The largest economic downturn or freeze of accounts or whatever, however you want to put it, in our generation occurred just a few years ago, right? And RV parks actually saw economical growth, right? So we do know that it's like COVID proof. We do know that it's generally fares well. And that's typically because one, it has low overhead. So if you buy the park right, you can run lean and mean and still stay viable. But we also know that in order for a park to be profitable, it doesn't take much to add additional streams of income or take much to increase a little bit of occupancy to offset any costs associated. So we would like to say, we'll say nothing's guaranteed, but we do believe that parks are pretty well recession proof. And the fact that we just had proof of it during COVID, which is one of our largest economic downturns in the recent times, they were more viable than ever and more profitable than ever. So when it comes to outdoors and having a place to stay, those are kind of just always there, right? They're kind of back to the essentials, right? RV parks provide a place to live and also provide a place just to like reconnect with nature, which are just part of that human element that are required almost at like our core. So I think they're always important as like having food and water to drink. So
And then is there a way to mitigate that risk? Or for example, let's say, are you always there at the park? Or is there somebody, watching the park on your behalf? Do you have, people that are looking at the, checking in the people? Like, how can I myself, if I'm a park, can I manage it myself or do I have to like hire managers?
yeah, so there's two parts to your questions. When it comes to mitigating risk, it kind of goes back to my earlier statements about buying it correctly, underwriting it correctly, and underwriting it for like, oh crap scenarios and having a war chest built in and factoring in money where there's going to be periods of downtime so that you actually pre-budget those money coming in. And then secondly, when it comes to like managing the day-to-day and the fund, we're typically looking at parks that have usually like a salaried person on staff and maybe sometimes a secondary person on staff who's like an assistant or part-time operations. And then with that, we usually have another like national or larger third-party management company overseeing them who'll do the bulk of the bookkeeping and the legal. So when it comes to managing parks, you are hands-off. The fund's typically hands-off. We're getting, monthly updates, but we're not on site having to manage every day. We're typically getting updates from our people who live on the park, who operate the park, 40, 50 hours a week. And we're also getting updates from our national property managers who are giving us financial updates and legal updates. And if there's any major concerns, they're the ones trading it back to us. So we don't have to be the park. We always go by maybe a couple times a year just to make sure there's nothing slipping under our nose, but we're not there every day. We're not there every week. We're not there every month. So we are, in essence, a passive and remote operation.
Got it. So let's say I'm an investor and I want to invest in your guys' funds. I don't have to, check in people. I don't have to, clean toilets. I don't have to do any maintenance on the end.
I mean, you definitely can, right? I mean, we commend you for that. We can definitely maybe work you a sweet deal, give you some more equity for being an operator as well. But yeah, in a fund of fund, right? You are investing as a limited partner. So in essence, you're just kind of hanging out and getting paychecks. You're not required to be on site. You're not required to make tough decisions. You're not required to take risk and liability associated with the operators or the GPs involved. So you're sort of just along for the journey, and it is a passive state, but we always open to, educating our investors, giving them information if they want it, but it's not a requirement. And nor are you required to become an employee to be in the investment, right? You're just there to get a return on your money. And if you want to, learn along the way, but none of it's a requirement.
I got it. I don't know if Brian or Shane, you guys want to answer this, but usually when it comes to investing, people are a little bit scared when it comes to investing. So, say reassurances, I guess, when people do invest in Wise Choice Fund, what is a reassurance that I guess you can say that people get when it comes to investing in Wise Choice?
Well, we've done the due diligence and the underwriting to make sure it's a good deal, first of all. So we go visit the park before we go pay for it, and before we go to closing. So we're going to go see it. We're going to make sure it's all a good deal. We're going to make sure that everything is there that the seller said was going to be there. And then we're going to make sure it cash flows. The cash flows, it brings in good returns. And then we can basically improve it to improve the returns and improve the park rents. With all those things combined, we're going to make sure it's a good investment for our investors. And it's going to perform over the years and give us a good return on when we go sell it.
Yeah, I'll chime in as well after Brian. Another thing to add too is like, we're usually on the fund, we are deploying capital on a lot of times other operators' parks. And those operators, when they come to us, have to show us their ability to underwrite They have to show their ability to operate a park. So ideally, we're looking for operators who have prior park experience that they've either owned or operated themselves, or they've been a syndicate of before. So we're usually aligning ourselves with already an optimized partner with a track record. And then we come in, as Brian said, we underwrite as well. So we're stacking underwriting, and we're putting multiple sets of eyes to do due diligence for the operator's end, our end, and the operator's end to whoever they may be buying from. And sometimes we also may elicit another third person, whether it's adjacent fund we know or adjacent operator we know, to do additional underwriting and screening for us, who may be a local area expert. And they're able to give another scrutiny to the deal to make sure there's nothing missed or overlooked or any particular nuances of a market that we may not be aware of. So there are a few caveats there. It's not just us. You're getting our team, you're getting operators and their team and their partners, and also our partnerships with other people we sponsor with to help confirm details and aspects of the parks we look at.
And then I do have one question that a lot of people kind of don't answer, and that's, let's say, for example, worst case scenario, I have $50,000 to invest, and for some weird reason, the deal goes bad and I lose it all. Like, what would that scenario be where I lose all my?
Well, it's still backed by real estate. So if we lost everything, the real estate is still there. The real estate, we can sell the real estate and make our money back. So you'd most likely get your $50,000 back. And then we'd be the ones that lose because we'd pay our investors back first.
Yeah. Another thing to mention there too is, because we are going to get an appraisal on most of these deals, right? So we have an assumption of value at the point of closing. So if the value and our proportion of buying to the deal is secure enough, it usually gives us enough leverage to sell the deal and a fire sale to get our money back. And also, because we are a fund to funds, we're not a syndicate. Your money is not tied to a deal; it is tied to a portfolio, right? So your money is diluted in risk, and it's diversified in multiple deals. So even if one park crashes and burns, you may be associated with several other parks which are doing well. So your net return, your average return, are still sufficient to be a preferred return that we've recommended or suggested.
Right. All right, Shane. So let's say I do have that $50,000 to invest. How do I go about investing that money? Like, what are the instructions?
Yeah. So we are a fund, right? So we have we use a portal. Particularly, we use Cashflow Portal. We partner with them, but it is an investor portal where you go and you read our legal documents about investing with us and what we're looking to offer. And it's in this portal where you then are confirmed your identity, we confirm your accreditation status, and then you're there able to then get wiring instructions and wire money to the fund, which then goes into whatever deals you may have at that time. But the fund, in essence, right, it is structured as a 506C with the Regulation D. It is for accredited investors only. So we do a lot of that managing in the portal. We confirm people before we take their money, just to confirm, especially as it's a requirement of our SRC regulations. But we also will put people in different buckets of investors, right? So you have a Class A investor at 50 grand. We have a Class B investor at 100 grand. We have Class C investors at 250,000 plus, right? And each of those investor classes is associated with a different preferred return and a different split on equity that ranges between 40 and 80% when the park sells. So in a long-winded way of saying that, when you come to us, if you're interested, you're excited, you go to the portal, we vet each other, right? You sign our legal doc, we make sure you are who you say you are, make sure that we're not, taking grandma's money and running away with it. And then we go through a verified accreditation with like the IRS or with like your CPA. And then we fund you into the bucket based upon the allocations you give us. And then we set you up for returns based upon whatever that bucket is that you fall into.